Hey, welcome to Leading Simple. Today is a bit of a unique day. This episode is very unique. I got the chance to meet one of my ministry heroes several months ago when I was introduced to him and he agreed to come on the podcast. And I sat down with the legend, Tony Morgan. And I say legend, he was only 55, but he had been running a church consulting company called the Unstuck Group for probably 20 years. Done an amazing job with it. I love his podcast, the Unstuck podcast. And I was really excited to release his recording that I recorded with him just a few months ago. On September 4th of 2024, Tony had a massive heart attack and went home to be with the Lord. Gone way too soon, and we will definitely miss Tony. But I definitely wanted you to hear from him because you're going to hear his passion for the church, his love for what it is he got to do, and it's going to make a lasting impression upon you. And I thought it'd be best for us to remember Tony by hearing some of his final words in one of his final interviews. Tony, we love you, we miss you, but we are so excited for where you are now. Here's my conversation with Tony Morgan.
Do we need to go back?
You know what? I'm going to ask right now because I just saw this. Lou, are we recording?
We have been?
Okay. We've been recording. All right.
Yes.
Go ahead.
It's better to find out on the front end of the conversation, though, isn't it?
I just thought the same thing. Thank you. Because I've done that before.
Is he sure he captured it? Because I just got the recording of...
I did too. So it's been recording before I hit record right now? Okay.
Yeah, okay. There's a backup plan. That's always good. So there are some common challenges.
So apparently we weren't recording. So I missed the first few minutes of the video of Tony. So we're going to play the entire interview in its entirety, obviously. But the first part of it, you just won't be able to see both of our handsome faces. So here we go. Tony Morgan, thank you for joining the show. Listen, I've been a longtime fan, and I know we met recently over Zoom, and I'm just honored that you would take the time to be on our show. So for our listeners that don't know who you are, would you give us a little bit of background and explain why you're a Cleveland Guardians fan?
Yeah, so my family's originally from Ohio, and so we have several generations of Cleveland fans, and because of that, it's hard. I'm still working through the transition from Cleveland Indians to Cleveland Guardians, just to be honest.
Yeah, I had to catch myself too.
Let me start with my family. Emily and I met when we were in middle school. We started dating in high school, got married right after college. So we've known each other for quite a long time, but I'm not going to tell you how long because it would give away her age. So I'm not going to do that. And we have 4 kids, 4 adult kids, essentially. Our youngest she'll be a sophomore at the University of Georgia this coming year. And then the Morgans have been busy because we've had our 3 older kids have all gotten married within the last 18 months.
Wow.
So we've been very busy.
That sounds very expensive too.
Yes, it is, in case you're wondering.
All the rates for Unstuck Group just went up.
For almost half a century, GNPI has been creating media and sharing Jesus. From solar kits to social media, the gospel message has been on the move around the world. Because of people like you, the ministry is now 27 teams strong in 16 countries. And with the inauguration of Nomad Academy, a new generation of media makers receive training to create media and share the good news. In India, Hindi Church Online reaches hundreds of thousands of viewers per week. Projects like The Global Gospel and Amazing Stories connect with children and adults alike in their own heart languages. In fact, GNPI teams engaged over 66 million with the good news last year. But with billions still waiting, we must do more. So, where do we go from here? Mission 15. This movement will send 1 billion gospel invitations by the end of 2030. It's going to take all of us to reach this goal. What can you do? It's easy. Simply pray, share, and give. You can pray for 15 minutes that people around the world will hear the good news. You can share your faith 15 times with others. Invite them to your small group or church. You can give $15 one time or monthly. With every $15 given, 450 gospel invitations will go out. Just imagine the impact you could have over a year when you pray, share, and give. By the power of the Holy Spirit and your partnership, we at GNPI believe this audacious goal is attainable, to send 1 billion invitations to follow Jesus by the end of 2030. Will you join the movement?
Tell me about ministry life. How long have you been in ministry? I know you were part of a church and now you help churches. Walk us through that.
Yeah, so I've been in ministry. I transitioned from marketplace into full-time ministry about 25 years ago, I guess, a little bit more than that. Mm-hmm. And actually, next week, I don't know when you release your podcast, is when we celebrate our 15th anniversary at the Unstuck Group. And so,
congratulations.
Had the opportunity to serve on staff in pastoral roles at a couple of great churches, one near South Bend, Indiana, and then some folks may be familiar with New Spring Church in South Carolina. I helped New Spring launch their multi-site strategy, among other things. But we started the Unstuck Group 15 years ago now. And wow, it's been fun, Rusty, because we've had the opportunity now to work with, I think we're closing in on 700 different churches on the ground, serving those churches.
Wow.
And it's all different shapes and sizes. We work with a lot of smaller churches, including churches with less than 200 in attendance. And we've had the honor and privilege of serving some very large churches, well over 20,000 in attendance, multi-site, single location, urban, rural context, churches primarily in North America, but also in the UK and Costa Rica and some other international locations. And so it's just been incredible to see what God's doing through the body of Christ, through the local church in so many different contexts. And, one of the themes we can maybe talk about in our conversation today, everything I read about fewer people connecting to church, connecting to faith, I trust that all of that research is accurate, but I get to see firsthand the churches that are really having an incredible kingdom impact. And I think right now there's close to 60,000 church leaders that engage with our content at the Unstuck Group on a consistent basis. And what I know about those pastors and church leaders is they're hungry, they're curious, they're wanting to learn, and based on what we're seeing from the research we're doing with churches that connect with our content, they're healthy, they're growing, they're reaching more people for Jesus. And so it's fun to sit in my seat because I get to see the stories of what God's doing through pastors, through great people that love Jesus, that love his church, and are having an incredible kingdom impact in people's lives.
I love asking people this that work with multiple churches, and that is, give me some of your crazy stories, and I mean the positive ones, not the I can't believe that just happened, but a church tried this, and I thought, boy, I'm not sure if that's going to work, and it ended up being incredible. Whether that's I can't even think of one right off the top of my head, whether they threw a circus on the property or whatever they did, but what are some of those that you thought, boy, that is thinking way outside the box?
Well, I have some good friends in Hobbs, New Mexico. The church started in a sale barn and primarily reaching cowboys. In fact, their original service, I think, was on Monday evening. They still have a Monday evening service as far as I know, because primarily the cowboy, the kind of that Western culture that they were reaching, they were at the rodeo during the weekend. And so when I first of all, the pastor has become a good friend. Ty Bean, their senior pastor, reached out to me. Our initial conversation, he was inquiring about connecting with their church and helping them move their mission forward. My first question was, does this mean I have to buy a cowboy hat and cowboy boots? And he said, please don't, actually. Don't do that. But it's been fun to see a church that approached launching their ministry very different than I've seen any other church do, and now they're reaching well over 1,000 people every Sunday, and only because they were really clear about who they were trying to reach, and then very intentional about the strategies that they were engaging in order to connect that person to faith and then to church. And it's just, there are different examples of that I could point to. But ultimately, Rusty, what it comes down to is churches not trying to do what other churches are doing, but churches that are really committed to helping people meet and follow Jesus.
I know that for a long time, the trend was do a Saturday night service, and then it was do a Sunday night service. Now, many of us are doing Thursday night services. Mm-hmm. Are you seeing the Monday night thing happen not just at Cowboy churches, but other churches as well? I know of a couple offhand that have tried that. Is that a growing trend right now?
I don't necessarily say this night of the week is a growing trend. What I would say is a trend is looking at opportunities during the week. Rather than competing with everybody else's time and attention on the weekend.
Right.
So I won't be surprised if over time that becomes more common practice, whether it's a Thursday evening or a Monday evening, but some other time during the week where we're at least creating an option for people that we're trying to reach, but also for the folks that are connected to our churches that, for whatever reason or in a particular season of life, Sunday morning is not optimal, and maybe not even Saturday or Sunday evening is optimal, but they still love Jesus and they still want to be engaged in the church, and so that'll create opportunities for them as well.
That's great. Well, I wanted to ask you, you've been doing this 15 years now. That's just a great stretch, and I'm sure you've seen so many different things come and go, but there has to be some commonality as well. What's the one or two things that you've just noticed healthy churches do this? Whether it's after they've met with you or before they've met with you, you've helped a lot of churches get healthy, but what's a couple common denominators, regardless of size and regardless of maybe even age of the church? Yeah.
So what keeps my job fun and interesting is every situation that we walk into, it's a unique combination of challenges that church is trying to overcome so that they can expand their impact in people's lives. The common ones, though, that we run into, and one I just alluded to. Whoops. Were we not recording? Do we need to go back?
You know what? I'm going to ask right now because I just saw this. Lou, are we recording? Okay. We've been recording. All right.
We have been?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Go ahead.
It's better to find out on the front end of the conversation,
I just
though,
thought the
isn't
same thing. Thank you. Because I've done that before.
Is he sure he captured it? Because I just got the recording.
I did too. So it's been recording before I hit record right now? Okay. See, they've dummy proofed it. They know me. All right.
Yeah, okay. There's a backup plan. That's always good. So there are some common challenges that we run into. One of them, and I've kind of just alluded to it, when churches, and this is the natural drift, Rusty, is over time, they start to reach new people. Those people connect to faith, they connect to the church, and then over time, the focus becomes on the person that's already a Jesus follower and already connected to the church, and churches lose sight of the person outside the faith and outside the church that they're trying to reach. And so, it's just one of every healthy church will eventually get to that place where they recognize we just have to double down and get more intentional again about our reach strategy. So having clear understanding of who we're trying to reach in our mission field, and then making sure we have intentional strategy to reach that person, I think that's a common challenge that we run into. kind of the opposite side of that, but certainly integrated, is some churches, I think, sometimes maybe put too much emphasis on the teaching as part of spiritual formation that happens on Sunday morning, and not thinking about all the other spiritual practices and the other relational connections that are required to encourage people to take their next steps of faith. And so not having intentionality around a spiritual formation strategy, I think, is another common challenge that we run into. The other two are a little bit more nuanced, but they have to do with complexity and empowerment. So on the complexity side, usually it's a complexity of programming, ministry programming, or a complexity about how decisions are made that creates challenges for churches. On the programming side, the challenge is it's all good stuff that the church is doing, but they're doing so much that it's very difficult to focus on the essential, kind of the priority next steps that we're encouraging people to take. And so what ends up happening, and again, no church sets out to do this, but what ends up happening over time is you have ministry programs that really begin to compete with each other for people's time and attention. And that creates challenge. But then the other area of complexity has to do with more the governance side of how churches make decisions. So here, think about board, think about committees, think about the intersection of those lay leadership teams with the staff teams, and where churches have more complexity in their governance model in that part of their structure, we find that leads to some challenges. In fact, we have a lot of data now to confirm some of these things, and around complexity and governance. This is so fascinating, and we've checked this many times through the years. But churches that are plateaued or in decline typically have larger church boards. I think the last time I looked at it was 40 or 45% larger than healthy, thriving, growing churches. And they have twice as many committees as healthy, thriving, growing churches. So it's funny, it doesn't, intuitively, it may not make sense. The more people we have involved in serving in leadership, the more unhealthy the church gets. That doesn't make sense. But I think it has more to do with just the complexity of the decision-making process. And the more people we involve, the more voices we add to the conversation, the harder it is to get consensus around direction, and the longer it takes to do that. And when it gets harder to get consensus and it takes more time to do that over time then leads to challenges for churches. So that's complexity. And then empowerment. Frankly, I don't know how many senior pastors are listening to your podcast, Rusty, but hopefully when they hear what I'm about to say, this will help them celebrate and challenge them to engage this conversation with their lay leadership teams. But it's not uncommon for us to find that one of the key reasons why churches are stuck is because senior pastors aren't empowered to do what God called them to do. And when boards see themselves as kind of the checks and balances for the pastor's leadership and influence, rather than looking at their role to influence and encourage the pastor to live out the calling that God's placed on their life, that's where we find churches getting to a place where it almost becomes an unhealthy tension between the board and the pastor, and rather than working together, united in mind and purpose, to carry out the mission that God's called the church to. And so sometimes that plays itself out in the senior pastor not being empowered. But many times, especially for larger churches, what that means is the boards are in an unhealthy way trying to be involved in the day-to-day of ministry, including the day-to-day leadership of the staff, rather than hiring and empowering a senior pastor to essentially hire and empower everybody else on staff to accomplish the mission of the church. So again, there are dozens more challenges that we run into depending on the situation, but those seem to be some of the more common challenges we discover.
That's so fascinating. I remember years ago reading books about the growth barriers that churches will have. Usually there's a growth barrier when they hit, 200 or they hit 400 or 800, 1200, those kind of barriers. And oftentimes it was associated with, well, you've run out of space, you've run out of children's space or parking space. But the board thing is such a big deal because at some point the board of the church no longer can know everything that happens at the church, sign off on everything. Do you find that happens at like the level of like 200, or can they make it as far as 800? Or what point do you think, okay, we've got to recognize that they don't know everything?
It's a combination of probably the size of the church and also the size of the staff team. But I would say I've seen some churches get pretty large. Pushing 1,000 people in attendance, and they've not addressed this yet, but everybody's feeling it. And to the point where even the lay people are feeling it. It's like, even though they have some authority on paper, they recognize that the complexity of the challenges and the decisions that are being made, it's kind of beyond their capacity as people that are, they have full-time jobs, they have full-time families that they're trying to love on, and full-time marriages that they're trying to make sure are healthy. And then they're pulled into periodically once a month or whatever that looks like, some big decisions, and recognizing this is beyond the capacity of volunteers, just with volunteer time. We really have to now hire and empower staff people, professionals, if you will, to help lead the church. So I've seen churches get a little bit larger, but boy, they feel it at that point, both on the staff side, but like I said, also on the lay leadership side.
Did you know that there's more than 6 billion people who do not know Jesus, don't have a relationship with him? 3 billion that don't even know his name, haven't even heard of him. Good News Productions International is working to solve that problem. GNPI has been working for decades now to help use media to help people come to know and find and follow Jesus. You can check out more from gnpi.org, but you can also go and be a part of their bold initiative to share the gospel over 1 billion times in the next few years. Check out mission15.global or go to gnpi.org. I'm going to ask you to sign up through mission15.global and pledge $15 a month. That's like a latte or two, in order to help people come to know Jesus globally. The work they do is incredible, and you're going to want to hear all about it on our podcast with Mike Schrage. So check that out, and check out GNPI and the work they're doing, mission15.global, and be a part of it today. I was part of a church many years ago, right out of college, that had I think an elder board of about 40 people, and a deacon board of about 100. And so just the complexity of getting things done, because you're only meeting once a month, and then there's all the the lobbying that goes on before and after the meeting to get what you need, and the committees. And it was very difficult because, at some point, you're right, everybody feels it, but you have two kinds of leaders. The one that says, well, why wasn't I notified about this? And they kind of, lean in. And the other one that says, why are you bothering me with this? And you've got to kind of set some boundaries, right?
Yeah,
well,
that's right.
Okay,
that's right.
So when it comes to this, you've been working with all these churches, so many healthy churches that you have been able to propel into that next level, where there's not some big fire they got to put out. There's some complexity that they've got to decide, all right, how are we going to move ahead with these great problems? They always ask questions, and I'm sure there are questions like, should we add a service? Is it time to go multi-site? Those kind of things. What do healthy churches ask? What are the questions we should be asking rather than the common questions we get stuck with?
That's interesting. I think healthy churches, this is going to sound crazy, but they naturally always think about why is something not working. But what distinguishes the healthiest of churches is they are periodically also asking the question, why is it working? So understanding the strategies that they're engaging, whether that's their reach strategy or their spiritual formation strategy or their multi-site strategy, whatever the case might be, just asking the question, why are we winning in this area right now, helps to confirm strategy that if we're not careful, we can assume health is happening for a certain reason, start to tweak on the fringes, and then blame it on that decision when in reality, we didn't fully understand what was causing the health, the growth, the church to thrive in a particular season.
That's
What's interesting, of course, is commonly the churches that are experiencing the most growth, percentage-wise, tend to be younger churches. And those younger churches, there are two commonalities about younger churches. First, they are very outsider focused, and so it's not that they don't they understand completely that as you reach new people and as new people come to faith, there's a responsibility, a stewardship as ministers of the gospel to help people experience spiritual formation and discipleship and help them take their next steps towards Jesus as followers of Jesus. But their bias is more towards reaching people outside the walls of the church. And I understand why they have that bias. It's because when you're a new church, a new ministry, you're trying to, get established, get a foundation, and you are very focused on getting new people to come to the church. Not just to have thriving ministry, but frankly, just to pay the bills. You got to reach people in order to encourage them to begin to give their tithes and offerings, so that financially you become a sustainable ministry. So I get it, but there's this natural bias to trying to reach new people. But then the second interesting thing about newer churches is they're more willing to make changes, to innovate, to try, to fail, and try again. When you get to a certain size as a church, it's not that, I don't think it's that you're growing comfortable. It's just that you're at a size where that push to innovate and change and try things and fail, it's just not as urgent as it is when you're a younger ministry. And so because of that, I think healthy churches, the ones that have lasted for generations, are asking that question of what do we need to try? What do we need to try and fail at? And along those lines, Rusty, the language I've started to use is, I think at any season of a church, we need to have one bold move that's in front of us. And it's obvious in younger churches, the bold move is getting established as a ministry in a new location with new people, trying to reach new people. But as churches age, and they start to move into their second and third decade, or they're starting to reach their second or third generation, I think there's this natural tendency just to continue to focus in on the things that made the church so successful in its early years. And if we're not careful, we don't really have a bold move in front of us. And we know it's a bold move, by the way, when we're just challenged to pray more. Mm-hmm. We are challenged to think about who do we need to pull into this conversation, because we need to get the right people in the conversation if we're going to see this bold move through to completion. Mm-hmm. It forces us to probably raise some money because it's bigger than what we're seeing just coming through our natural offerings. If you don't have things like that in front of you, any church, if you don't have a bold move in front of you like that, I just think you tend to get a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more cautious, and it really doesn't force us to lean on God and to rally our church behind something that's going to help the church as a whole move forward. And what I've noticed, of course, is if you don't have something like that to rally your church, you start to have people that begin to focus just on their kind of area of the ministry. And over time, of course, that's where people's priorities within the walls of the church become louder than the overall mission of the church, and division and disunity start to form. So it's always good to make sure we have clarity about who we're trying to reach outside the walls of the church, and we have that one bold move in front of us all the time.
That's so good. Let me ask you, because you've seen a lot of churches do this, what are some bold moves churches have done? I mean, obviously, like you said, in the early days, it's get established, it's get a building, maybe it's to build a children's building next. What are some things that you've noticed in other churches that they come up with? Because I've noticed that once you get the buildings, then it's kind of like, all right, now what do we do? What does that look like?
Let me just share some examples what I've seen in recent years with churches we've served. Some of them may be more obvious, like, we need to expand our building. Some churches that are experiencing growth and they're thriving in their original location, their bold move is how can we replicate and multi-site through launching new campuses. Some churches, their bold move, they want to be a multiplying church. Multi-site's not their thing, but they're investing heavily, and their bold move is around church planting. I've seen churches that are really doubling down on the ministry that they're doing in their communities to meet the needs of people in their communities and partnering with great organizations. And so the bold move is more around how do we help meet the needs of folks in our community that are hurting or in need. I've seen churches bold moves around just trying to try to reach a broader cross section of the community that truly reflects the community. So that might be across generations, that might be across ethnicities, that might be across political lines. But I've seen churches that have bold moves. Just we want to reach people that reflect the diversity in all areas of the community where our church is located. So I've seen all kinds of bold moves out there, Rusty, and it's fun because you start to see the uniqueness of every pastor when you start to have those conversations, the team that they've pulled together, and the communities where the churches are located. And so it's fun to be a part of those conversations.
Have you noticed, and this just came to me, I remember when I first came out of Bible college, the norm was that churches were hiring really great communicators, preachers, pastors. Then their secondary was kind of like counseling or pastoral care. And then, we see the scales start to tip a little bit towards leadership. That became the buzzword, but also what churches were looking for. And communication became kind of secondary, or leaders who lead through their preaching on the weekends. Are you noticing a trend one way or the other if churches have kind of decided to go back to more of a just pastor us really well from the pulpit, for lack of a better term, and we'll build an infrastructure of leadership? Or is it just kind of depends on the situation?
I think it depends on the situation and the giftedness of whoever the senior pastor is, because we still are the body of Christ, and we still need all the unique gifting and wiring and experiences of the body of Christ. And so it really just kind of depends on whoever's in that senior pastor role, making sure we're complementing with all the other spiritual gifts. I will say, the smaller churches that we engage with, I think more commonly, the primary gifting that we see in those pastors is really more about the pastoral wiring in them. They tend to be stronger in the shepherding gifts. The larger the churches get, the leadership gifting and the communication gifting are typically pretty strong. So it kind of depends on the nature of the church that we're working with as well, Rusty.
Okay, I want to ask you this because I know you've been out of the local church as far as, on paid staff, vocational leadership in a local church for the last 15 years. I know you're very active in your home church, which is awesome. But if you were to go back into pastoral vocation on a church staff, what would your first 90 days look like, knowing what you know now? Let's say you're the senior pastor. What would you do immediately if you took over a church? It's an existing church.
Yeah.
It's not a church plant, but you've learned so much over the last 15 years. What's your first 90 days look like?
Well, first of all, it would involve a lot of conversations one-on-one and with teams of people in the church, just to get to know people, get to know their heart, begin to get a sense of the health and vibrancy of the church, that the congregation that I was stepping into. Then quickly behind that would be probably kind of going back to the framework that we use with every church we serve at the Unstuck Group, is kind of thinking about the foundational questions of why do we exist as a church? Who are we trying to reach? What's the kind of the culture that we want to shape within our staff team and then within our congregation as a whole? And then stepping into questions more about direction. Mm-hmm. Where do we sense God's calling us? What are the strategies that we need to engage to see that vision through? What's the structure and the team that we need to put in place in order to accomplish that? And then I would start to work with the leaders on the team just to think about priorities and action plans, and not only what do we need to be doing in each of our ministry areas to make sure each of our ministries are healthy and thriving, but for these bigger directional moves that we're trying to make, these bold moves that we're pursuing, what do we need to be working on today so that that future vision can become reality? So I think that's the work that I would be going through. And it's interesting that you mentioned the first 90 days, because in reality, when we engage with churches at the Unstuck Group, there's about a 90-day window that we prioritize where we want to walk through those steps that I just mentioned of kind of assessing where is the church now, where are we going in the future, what's the direction that we're heading, and then how are we going to get there, both through action, but also primarily by making sure we have the right structure in place and the right staffing in place in order to accomplish that. And we look at it through the first 90-day window initially and prioritizing those conversations, but then coming alongside pastors and teams in the months after that, just to make sure that the follow-through is happening and that we're providing ongoing coaching through implementation of those plans. But if it were me, jumping back into a church full-time, that's probably how I would approach it.
Wow. Well, that's great. Well, listen, this has been so rich and helpful. I just want to give you a chance to talk to our audience, for pastors out there that are thinking, boy, maybe we are stuck. Maybe we do need to reach out to Tony and find out more about what they do. Tell us, what are the indicators that they should call you and how to get in touch with you?
Yeah. So, for some pastors who have a heart for reaching for people for Jesus and the mission of the church, I know that there are some of you out there that you recognize your church is just not in a healthy spot, and you need an advocate to come alongside you to start to have conversations with some of your key lay leaders, maybe some of your staff leaders, to help them see that there's a greater potential for what God can do through your ministry. So we love coming alongside pastors like that to try to be an advocate for you so that you can hopefully begin to move the church in a healthy direction again. I will say, Rusty, most of the churches and pastors that reach out to us, though, on the surface, they look like healthy, thriving, growing churches. And their stuckness, if you will, is just about how do we continue to move our mission forward. It's just figuring out what does that next step look like, whether that's related to the bold moves that we were just talking about, stepping into multi-site strategy, figuring out how we maybe need to restructure our team so that we can continue to maximize the giftedness that we have on the team and close some gaps that we sense we have. Most of the churches that reach out to us are healthy churches, just trying to figure out how do we continue to move the mission forward. So if you're asking those types of questions, boy, we would love to come alongside the pastors that are listening in order to just help them and come alongside them, help them lead strong. Let me just say this too. We understand when churches reach out to us that there are a lot of customers, if you will, at that church. There's there's probably a board. There are probably lay people that are just heavily invested. There are staff leaders that certainly feel some investment. When a church reaches out to us, though, I'll just be honest, we know that we have one primary customer, and that's the senior pastor. Mm-hmm. And we just want to make sure we're doing everything we can for the senior pastor, not just to help the church move its mission forward, but more specifically to help the pastor, because you have a unique role. There's no doubt about it. You have a unique role in the spiritual influence that you are providing to your church body, but you also have this unique, anybody that's in a pastoral role, you are in a unique leadership position too. And so we get that, and we want to make sure that when we engage with a church that we're not just helping the church's overall mission, but we want to help the pastor too, make sure that they're taking their next step in their leadership and in their spiritual journey, and just trying to give the coaching and encouragement that you need to continue what you do as well in your calling.
I love that. I love your heart for not just the church, but the senior pastor. Obviously, that's near and dear to my heart. And nobody always ever really thinks the way that we think sometimes, which is a blessing and a curse. But I appreciate you looking out for some of my very good friends and blessing our churches in so many ways. Your podcast is called Unstuck, and you're part of the Unstuck Group. And for people that want to know more about that, where's the best place for them to go?
Just theunstuckgroup.com. Yeah. Okay. And you referenced earlier, I think, Amy, who is one of the key consultants on our team at the Unstuck Group, also is the co-host of our podcast. And gosh, you can ignore the stuff I say. Just listen to the wisdom that Amy has to share on the podcast every week too. But yes, hopefully that will be an encouragement to you as well.
Well, that's great. Well, Tony, I really appreciate your time with us. Grateful for you and what you do for the kingdom, and good luck to you. And I cannot say it to your Cleveland Guardians because I'm a Royals fan and they're in the same division. So good luck, my friend. Thank you. Well, I'm so grateful that Tony was able to spend some time with us before he went back to meet with Jesus, and I am so grateful to be able to share that with you. Hopefully it was impactful for you. Hopefully you'll share it with a friend and let Tony's legacy continue to live on. I want to challenge you to continue to listen to the Unstuck Group podcast. Go back to listen to old episodes and new ones as they continue to help churches get unstuck. Thanks for being with us today. We'll be back with new content from Simple Faith. And if you haven't caught up with Monday Minute, it's something that I do every Sunday right after I walk off stage, and I share a little bit extra from the weekend sermon. And so you can catch that as well through this channel, and you can also catch the Monday Minute and see what we're doing here and keep up to date with our messages here at Crossroads. But for now, thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week with a new episode of Simple Faith. As always, keep it simple.